What if being a woman, outspoken, independent, or simply sad, was enough to have you locked away for life, your brain cut into, your name erased from history? Between 1850 and 1950, tens of thousands of women disappeared into America's asylums, not because they were insane, but because they were inconvenient, and the doctors who locked them up became famous. The women were never heard from again. This is the story of the women they locked away, and the question we never asked until now.
In 1860, a woman named Elizabeth Packard was committed to an insane asylum by her husband. Her crime? She disagreed with his religious views. She wanted to think for herself. She spent 3 years locked behind bars. When she finally got out, she had to fight in court to be declared sane, even though she had never been insane in the first place. Elizabeth was not alone. Between 1850 and 1950, more than 500,000 people were confined to public and private asylums across the United States. A staggering number of them were women, and most were not mentally ill. They were wives who talked back, daughters who refused to marry, widows who controlled their own money, immigrant women who didn't speak English, women who were simply inconvenient to the men around them. The diagnosis that put them away was often the same: hysteria. Hysteria was a catch-all label that could mean anything from anxiety to independence. It came from the Greek word hystera, meaning uterus. Doctors believed the womb wandered through the body, causing emotional instability. The cure? Rest, isolation, and in many cases, surgery. Some women never left. In most states, it took only one thing to commit a woman to an asylum: her husband's signature. A man could walk into a courthouse, declare his wife insane, and have her taken away without her ever speaking in her own defense. No medical evaluation required, no hearing, no appeal. Once inside, women were subjected to treatments that would be called torture today. They were strapped to beds for days, submerged in ice-cold baths for hours, given drugs that left them barely conscious, forced into rest cures where they were not allowed to speak, write, or even move. Doctors who advocated these methods were celebrated. Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell became famous for his rest cure, essentially solitary confinement for women. He prescribed it to Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who later wrote The Yellow Wallpaper as a horror story based on her own experience. Gilman barely escaped with her sanity, but most women had no Charlotte Perkins Gilman to tell their stories. They simply vanished. The 1940s brought a new solution: the lobotomy. Dr. Walter Freeman believed he could cure mental illness by severing the connections in the prefrontal cortex. His method was brutally simple. He used an ice pick inserted through the eye socket, tapped with a hammer. No anesthesia, no sterile operating room. He performed hundreds of these procedures in his own car, in hotel rooms, in his office. His favorite patients were women. Freeman believed women were more emotional and therefore more in need of his cure. He targeted women who were depressed, women who had been abused, women who simply didn't conform. After the procedure, many became passive, childlike, exactly what society wanted them to be. One of his most famous patients was Rosemary Kennedy. The sister of President John F. Kennedy was lobotomized at age 23 because she was moody and occasionally had seizures. The procedure left her permanently incapacitated. She spent the rest of her life in an institution, unable to speak clearly, unable to walk without help. Her family told the world she was mentally disabled from birth. The truth was hidden for decades. Not all women stayed silent. Elizabeth Packard, the woman we opened with, did something extraordinary. After she won her freedom, she did not go home and live quietly. She traveled across the country. She testified before state legislatures, she wrote books, and she fought for laws that would prevent husbands from committing wives without a formal hearing. By the time she died in 1897, she had helped change the laws in more than 20 states. But Elizabeth was the exception. For every woman who escaped and fought back, hundreds more died inside the walls. Their medical records, if they exist at all, list vague diagnoses like moral insanity or chronic mania. In reality, many were simply women who had nowhere else to go. One of the most disturbing parts of this history is how completely it was erased. The asylums themselves are gone now. Most were closed in the 1970s and 80s. Their buildings are often converted into condos, office parks, or left to crumble. The cemeteries where patients were buried in unmarked graves remain hidden, often paved over or forgotten. Until recently, mainstream history textbooks did not mention the mass confinement of women. The lobotomy was presented as a bold medical breakthrough, not a violation. The men who performed these procedures were remembered as pioneers. The women who endured them were forgotten. But in the last 20 years, descendants have started digging. They have found medical records. They have located burial sites. They have begun to piece together the stories their grandmothers never told them. So why does this story matter today? Because it reminds us that injustice often wears a white coat, that what is called science in one generation is called barbarism in the next, and that the people who are silenced, the inconvenient women, the forgotten patients, the ones who disappear, are not just statistics. They had names, they had families, they had lives that were stolen. But here is what gives me hope. The women who survived, like Elizabeth Packard, did not accept their fate. They fought, and the descendants today who dig through forgotten records, who mark unmarked graves, who say the names that were erased, they are fighting too. We cannot change what happened, but we can choose to remember. We can choose to ask the hard questions. We can choose to listen to the voices that are being silenced right now in our own time. And we can decide that we will not be the generation that looks away, because every woman who was locked away deserved to be heard. And now, finally, we are listening.